On today's episode of the Wealthy Podcast, I'm speaking with Melissa Fedderson, who is the manager of campus wellness at UBCO Okanagan, and also probably one of our community's foremost experts on youth mental health. Melissa is helping us really unpack some of the reasons why our kiddos are facing unprecedented levels of anxiety and depression, and some of the reasons why our environments and even our parenting are contributing to this. You're going to want to listen up. So there is this new book out, The Anxious Generation, by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, that I have to admit has me feeling a little anxious. In it, he explores the escalating mental health crisis among our young people, how factors like the rise of smartphones, social media, and even our parenting styles have created the conditions whereby teens are perpetually connected, yet increasingly isolated, without the skills to cope both online and off. As parents, our desire to keep our kids safe these days means we might be monitoring every offline move, yet online activities are our kids' private domains. And we're learning that this combination is proving detrimental to our kids' mental and social well-being and resiliency. According to Stats Canada's 2023 Canadian Health Survey on Children and Youth, youth anxiety and depression rates have surged, with 1 in 4 adolescents reporting persistent feelings of hopelessness. On today's episode of the Wealthy Podcast, I'm joined by Melissa Fedderson, who I first met several years ago. Back then, she was heavily involved in the campaign to bring Foundry Kelowna to the Okanagan. She's now the manager of campus wellness at UBCO Okanagan. Melissa has extensive experience in the youth mental health space, both practically in her work and also on the research side. And she's here today to help us understand some of the reasons why there's been such a dramatic increase in youth anxiety and depression, and most vitally, what actions we can take as a community and as individuals to support their resilience and well-being. Whew, that was an intro. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Shauna. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you again.
Yes.
I have fond memories of our time spent together fundraising and rallying community to bring Foundry Kelowna to our city and our region.
Yes.
And so it's really nice to reconnect with you.
Yeah, great to catch up.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start where we always start on the Wealthy Podcast. We have an opening tradition.
Okay.
Because everybody that comes and sits in that seat sort of shares a similar thread in that healthcare is more than just sort of a passing fancy and is a true passion. So I would like to know, what is your earliest memory, or how did you come to develop this passion that you have for, in your case, the health and well-being, our mental health care?
Yeah, I was a kid who had a lot of time actually in the hospital. I had broken arms and pneumonia, and I remember thinking nurses were very cool, and I liked being around nurses, and they were caring, organized, thoughtful folks, and I knew a lot of nurses. I wanted to be a nurse, so I moved into nursing. My undergrad is in Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and then sort of it was more about really caring about youth and young adults, and in all sorts of domains in our lives. My husband and I were really interested in youth and young people, and so I ended up moving into public health care, public health nursing, and then ended up at back then OUC as a nurse on campus, and sort of went on from there. Anything that was interesting around youth health, I was a part of for many, many years in the Okanagan. So yeah, that's sort of
it just
the
seems
trajectory.
Like the path found you, kind of.
Yeah, totally. And as I reflect too, there was other things. In the 90s, I would say we didn't understand when someone was struggling with mental illness. We they were jerks, they were bullies, they were not getting up in the morning. And we see where those pathways unfolded to in regards to what we see around us in people our age, around substance use and addictions. And I see another path forward for our young people as well, that early intervention and early recognition of some of these things. So sometimes when I hear those stats of like all the recognition of anxiety and depression in young people, I'm sure there is an actual increase, but I think there's also an increase in our recognition,
awareness,
and that hopefully young people will get the care and the treatment and the skills they need to have better health outcomes over time, and that we won't see what we're seeing in a lot of our middle-aged folks now.
Yeah, and I think that's I am glad you actually bring up that point, because sometimes with these stats, particularly around mental health, we also have to recognize that, you know, back in 2010, there was a big study in 2010. It was less talked about, right? And therefore, I mean, I believe that their numbers come from reporting, right? So people self-reporting feelings of anxiety, depression, hopelessness, right? So if there's still stigma, and that's not to say that there isn't still today, but if there is a larger stigma attached to it, you're going to have less reporting of it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's exactly true. Yeah. And I think in this case, I think we're in a sort of tension zone there, because while I don't want to hit the absolute panic alarm, there's also some really compelling evidence around hospitalization, around self-harm, around some of these things that absolutely we know we have an escalating trend. So I think I'm doing one of those both and answers that I often do. The answer is never as clear cut as we wish it was and simple as we wish it was. And so it's a bit of a both and scenario. But certainly CMHA National's release of the state of mental health across the nation and across Canada. Our youth are like the canary in the coal mine. They're telling us an important story, but it's community-wide. It's all of us. There's an important piece for all of us to be paying attention to about something about the way we're setting up community and social determinants of health is not winning for us right now.
And for our youth.
And yes.
And you dropped a little nugget in there, and I'm going to ask you to unpack it a little bit. Why are our youth the canary in the coal mine?
I just think there's I've often thought about that, from a society point of view, children and youth and their health levels. We notice it more because we are caring for them more. We're paying more attention to them. They hide things more poorly than I do. I know how to behave in different environments to cover when I'm having a bad day, when I'm feeling poor mentally, whereas children and youth don't. And their job up to age 24 is to learn emotional regulation skills. So to translate what's happening in their minds into a way to express it that fits with society. And that's their whole job. And so they haven't learned to hide anything. And so we do get to see the truth, which is the beautiful thing about youth, and as parents, which can be the painful thing, because they also don't hide when we hurt them. They hurt us right back. And so that is their job. And that's why we need to learn to not take everything personally, because this is the phase where they're learning how to negotiate those big feelings and big thoughts, and figure out how to be a human in this complicated world. And
they're testing it out on us as parents.
Yeah.
That's what I tell myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's just testing that out on me. I just have to show her that kind of strategy doesn't work well.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where all your skills you've learned. Don't react. It's not me.
Don't react. Oh, yes. One day I should have my daughter on this podcast.
We could have both had our daughters.
Yeah. Because I do feel like sometimes I talk a lot about my kids, and it's all my perspective.
That's right.
I sound like the wise and thoughtful, respectful parent in all of this, but I'm sure they tell a different story.
Yeah, that's her job. Yeah.
So I think, this is a big question, Melissa, but I think you're a really good person to answer it. Because you've been deeply embedded in youth mental health care in our community for some time, decades. And one of the things that I love about this particular podcast is that we can take these sort of global trends or issues like the ones raised in The Anxious Generation, this book. And there's a lot of, like you've referenced some of the statistics that are coming out. Some of the statistics, the US always has sort of better data than we do in Canada, and it's alarming. And they're not so far off from us just in terms of the way that they live and operate culturally and socially. So I think we can sort of look to some of those stats and see their application certainly in Canada. And they are scary just with regards to increases in emergency visits for particularly young women, for, what do they call it? Non-harming
non-suicidal self-harming behaviors.
Yes. And then suicide itself. So these are statistics that we do want to pay attention to. But I'm really curious, like, how would you describe the current state of the nation here where we live when it comes to young people's mental health?
Yeah. So I did a very fun project with Thrive Okanagan this summer, which I think we're going to talk more about later. But I had the opportunity to interview just a ton of people doing really important work in the region. So health promoting schools, practitioners, and people from different nonprofit organizations. I asked them where there was energy they were seeing, what they were worried about. So we talked about all sorts of things. I think one of the pieces that I found most interesting, somebody was talking about how it's hard to even get to the counseling part of their job because there feels like a lot of chaos for a lot of families in our region. And so youth are experiencing that. They're sensing that sense of like things feeling chaotic.
In what context?
Just sort of like housing, expenses, conflict, a lot of conflict. And that was something that I heard in several different spaces too, about increasing intimate partner violence among young people, increasing violence, which is a national trend. That's not just a Kelowna trend, but some increases in youth violence in different ways. And I thought that was a really interesting, and that was reflected in some research that I'm doing at UBC around social well-being, and young people talking a ton about not knowing how to deal with conflict, not bringing their whole selves to any environment because they don't know how to deal with if it becomes people don't like what they say, they don't like their opinion, that they won't have the skills to sort of defend themselves, to be a whole person in that context, to deal with the conflict that might emerge from having a particular opinion or feeling a certain way. So I heard a lot from university students about those types of skills they don't have to engage with others, to think through conflict and those types of things. And we're seeing those in households too, and these sort of emergent trends around going no contact with family that we're seeing a lot in millennials and Gen Z. Huge trend.
Going no contact
with their families or their parents or those types of things. It's a really interesting trend.
Like they're just like, we're done with you. Interesting.
Yeah. So like setting up really firm boundaries, which absolutely a skill all of us need to learn, but sort of this really significant trend that folks are starting to talk about around just like no contact, zero connection with family of origin. And again, that comes back to some of those like conflict skills and conflict resolution skills, and how to actually live in community with people who are very different than you, or who at different times in life you have profoundly different views than. And some of these pieces we're seeing emerge a lot in youth culture as well, just sort of an inability to deal with conflict and differences and those types of things, and then escalating to violence. So I think those were some of the really interesting things. And it also relates to emotional regulation skills. So being able to sort of monitor and come back down to middle ground, right? So mental health isn't about feeling happy all the time. And I think that's been like a massive distortion that a lot of cultural pieces of, we don't know how to grieve, we don't know how to be sad, we don't know how to perceive stress as something great for our flourishing and something that helps us succeed and something that helps us win. Instead, it's something that we should fear and turn away from and protect our children from. But all of those pieces are like the things that we need to be flourishing humans and to monitor our emotions and to be able to stay in relationships and to be able to move through life in healthy ways. And so I think that those were some of the key trends sort of that I heard about, and that sort of emotional regulation also links to some of the self-harm pieces, right? Because, and this is one of those pieces, maybe anecdotal, I don't know how, there might be people that push back on this, but frequently young people that I've worked with that self-harm really have a hard time talking about what they're actually feeling. And so the release of that emotion as a physical act instead of a words or a way to get it out of their bodies is a solution. It's a way of it's coping? A solution, a way of coping. Yeah. So it's and
I will say it's alarming for parents.
Absolutely.
What is the kind of, and I do think it's, I don't want to call it a trend, but I do think it, just again, anecdotally, it seems to be increasing. I've got teenagers, so this is not something that hasn't come up. And so what do you, like, what is the sort of, how alarming do we take this kind of activity, right?
That's a big question.
I know,
and
it is.
Certainly, I don't want to get into like health advice. I would say always take it seriously, always be pursuing support for your young person. And then also, a lot of things that we don't think are infectious are infectious. Anxiety is, when we bring high anxiety into a room, it catches everybody around us.
Totally.
And similarly, there is those pieces too. And I think contagion does seem to be part of social media. Like that does seem to be, there is more, and they are protected in some ways, but there's ways to get around some of those things. So there is a lot more talk of self-harm. There's more talk about like how my anxiety, my depression, and sort of some of these self-diagnostic pieces. A lot of people in sort of the post-secondary environments are talking about, students are coming in and wanting support for their disability that they've self-diagnosed in a certain environment because of different things. And I think, some of that awareness is so critical, right? Like a lot of people go, oh, do I have ADHD? Because of something they've seen on TikTok. And that can be true. Like there absolutely can be symptoms uncovered and those types of things. But there can also be things where it's like, actually, your attention span is short because you're only watching 8 seconds of every video. And we're starting to see frontal lobe changes, like physical. We can see it on MRIs now that brains are actually starting to change. They're starting to call it TikTok brain, where we're starting to see actual proof that brains are starting to shift around our attention spans. So I think there is something important there.
Wow, that is fascinating. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that we have a forum like this where we talk for an hour.
Yes.
I know we cut it up and make it into little 8-second bits too, but I find that fascinating. I do, just even the connection between social media and the conversations around mental health has just changed so dramatically.
Yes.
In some ways really good. Like
Totally.
It is healthy to create boundaries. It is healthy to acknowledge, when we're not feeling like aligned or stable. But again, as you say, there is a balance. Like not every day is going to be a great day. And that's normal.
Yeah.
So when is it not normal anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's great that you're actually conducting research in this area by talking to young people and having them report back.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the things that's really, really important in these conversations, that those voices are actually represented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We make a lot of assumptions around, I think one of my favorite, I almost compromised one of the focus groups because I did start talking to them about some university students, and one of the things, and we're talking about what is supporting your social well-being in a campus environment and what's compromising it. And when I walk through a certain area of the university campus, all the students are sitting earphones in, and many of them are watching Netflix. Some of them are studying, but many of them are watching TV or watching shorts, or they're on their computer or on their phone with headphones in. And I said, when I walk through, like, there's a lot of people on screens, and they could be interacting and making friends with the people beside them, but they're not. They're choosing to be on their phone. And I said, tell me about that. Like, how has that experience shifted your capacity to make friends on campus? And they said, oh, no, Melissa, the phone is the solution because I feel nervous and awkward. And so I go on my phone because I feel awkward. It's not the cause of my social isolation. I feel awkward and lonely, so I'm keeping company with my phone. So they saw it as the solution, whereas I saw it as very problematic. And it was such an interesting generational notice. And even as someone who uses their phone probably too much, I really thought about that as I could notice that as a problem for me, whereas young people see it as a solution for them, which was super interesting because it was like all of you, like you could all be making friends. You're 6 of you sitting at the table ignoring each other, and then talking about how profoundly lonely you feel and coming to counseling because you feel like it's a personality flaw that you have this loneliness, or that you can't get into a romantic relationship, or those types of things. So yeah, really interesting pieces there about how we define things and how we need to interrupt things in different ways. So the solution and the model we use in this research project we call Voice, we do youth adult partnerships, whereas like I bring my perspective and they bring theirs, and we collaboratively try to think about, well, what's an intervention we could try in this environment that we could both say might work. And we try to trust youth experts and trust like something I bring to the table too, with having been around the campus for a while and noticing changes. And yeah, it's really fun.
That example is so interesting. I think about how I heard a similar, it was a podcast, and they were talking about how young adults and youth are struggling to find romantic partners.
Yeah.
And, you and I talked about this yesterday, sort of like off mic, but like the lost art of flirting.
Yeah.
And this person who was being interviewed said the biggest impediment to those kinds of connections are I always say it wrong, the ear pods.
Yeah.
AirPods. Yeah. So like, for example, when back in the day when I went to the gym, maybe you wore like a Walkman or something like that. But like Walkman, I'm dating myself. That's fully 80s. Okay, we had some sort of headphone gear available, but for the most part you just like went to the gym, and you just went to the gym. You listened to whatever was playing in the gym stereo and this and that, and it was kind of like this place. It was, when you're young, like if you're healthy and fit and you go there and you like could meet people at the gym. But I think now, like, it would be so brave. I think of that scenario of, kids sitting at a university table, right? 6 of them, and they all have their earbuds in and looking at their phones, and like, it'd be so brave to be that person to like put your phone down and take your earpods out and just be sitting there.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And what is the things that can interrupt that? We have a cool program at the university, the BARC program, Therapy Dogs, and one of their cool research outcomes was like in an environment, the dog is there two youth start petting the dog, and then all of a sudden they start ignoring the dog and they're paying attention to each other. And they talked about micro communities forming up around the dogs. And there's just all of these things, subtle things. And I've been thinking about them as like nudges. Like there's lots in the literature that we do in health promotion that are like nudges you can do that help people do something different.
Right. Like disrupt
it. And so we're really trying to think about like what nudges could we do. So we're like,
the dog one is clever.
It's a clever one, right? But it was something they weren't expecting. Like they were testing to see it, like how the dog impacted the student's stress. But instead they found out, just like any of us who've ever had a puppy, all of a sudden you've made 12 friends on your walk
or if you bring a cat to the airport. You are the most popular person at the airport. Yeah. That happened to us last week. It wasn't me with the cat. Somebody else had a cat.
Now you have a friend for life.
I have it. I know. I knew she was from Halifax. Like I got her whole life story.
Yeah. So what are those things? Because even, the literature is really, there's these micro things where like if you're the type of person that talks to your checkout person, you actually have a much higher happiness quotient. Or if you're the person that talks to the person in line, now is it chicken or egg? Nobody knows. But like even those micro moments of connection have profound impact on our social well-being and our like overall engagement. And so like what micro nudges can we like come up with to help youth start connecting with each other in new ways? Because a lot of them are not, right?
Yeah. And I'm gonna circle back to like the smartphone thing, because like in every scenario that you're bringing up, the smartphone or these smart technologies seems to be like the barrier in between real life connection. And if I'm understanding correctly, that's what is like, I don't want to say lacking, but that's where there's a lot of struggle. Yeah. Is the real life connection, like totally. In real time, in real life connection. Like, you're standing in line at the grocery store and it's a long lineup. Like back in the day, we just talked to the person in front of us about the People magazine or whatever. Yeah. Now, literally, and I'm just as guilty of it. I just pull out my phone.
Yeah. I'll get an email done. Yeah, right. Totally.
It would be awkward to talk to the person in front of me. And they'd be like, why are you talking to me, weirdo?
Yeah. Totally.
But as you said, maybe not. Yeah. So I'm going to circle back to the smartphone, because like it seems like every generation has its thing that's going to ruin our children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think like there was like Elvis Presley. He was totally going to ruin our children for sure. And then for my generation, our generation, it was TV. Right. Yeah. Like, it's going to totally rot your brain. Yeah. It's going to rot your brain. And don't sit too close to the TV. Yeah. It's going to ruin your eyes. Like all these things. Right. And the kids are just becoming like these zombies because they're watching TV. And then for a while it was video games. And for this generation, it's the smartphone for sure. Yeah. Why is it different?
Yeah. I think there is some, well, it's interesting because I think Jonathan Haidt, this anxious generation, he would say it is profoundly different because of the addictive nature of it, because it's trained us. It's just like you would train a dog or train anything. It's reward for your attention. Whereas television didn't give us that immediate dopamine hit. So there is something about that they are talking about. And I have similarly, like, just because I worked with youth for so long, I'm like, okay, but it also is like there's a tension with everything. It isn't all or nothing. There is good and bad uses. But I think even for my son, last summer, 2 summers ago, he decided to go flip phone because he was sick of how much time he was wasting. Yeah. But he actually couldn't maintain it because his work schedule was on there. His bank was on there. He actually couldn't not have a smartphone. Mm-hmm. So it was like one of those moments where you're like, oh, like you actually cannot, there's no other way to see your work schedule. For a month, he made his sister download it and text him his schedule because he was trying so hard to commit to not having the smartphone. But in the end, he had to go back to it. But anyway,
so it's hard.
It's hard, right?
Yeah. Like we've structured our society around it.
It's replaced you've seen some of those like comparisons between like an 80s desk and a now desk, where it's like it all comes, everything that every device we used to have is now captured. Our Rolodex, our everything is on there. Actually, I don't know if I had a Rolodex.
Like, why do we even have business cards still? Like, but yeah, I had a Rolodex.
Yeah. So it's it is. We need it. We have to have it.
Yeah.
And we've made our whole society revolve around it. These are companies that have to show increase in profit. So they need to get better at their jobs, just as we all want to get better at our jobs. So it's not like it's a nefarious approach. It's just they're learning and getting better at their jobs and making us use these things more. And
their jobs are to get us to be on it.
Yes, they want our attention. That's how they sell us things and sell our kids things. So, so I do think that is the difference, is that it is a time where we are seeing more engagement, more use of it. It's harder to get away from them, whereas other things where you could make boundaries, you could do different things. So it's sort of the all-encompassing nature and how much time we can actually spend on these things. And I think too, we've both parented through this sort of time, and it is that part where we're busy, we're doing something, we're tired, our kids are in a lot of activities, we get home and we just let them go watch TV or we were pretty strict when they were smaller, and then as they got larger, we became less accountable in some of those ways, but still observe some things. My parenting go-to is to ask them for their phones and just see what their algorithm is, so I can see what types of things they're seeing, because that's one thing I know is that our algorithms feed what we've been following.
How do you do that? Oh, so you just
I just watch their
social
shorts.
channels?
I just look at what they're being fed, and I can get a sense of like, is there a bunch of self-harm videos here? No, great.
Oh,
she's looking at a lot of Porsches. Cool.
Porsches.
Or whatever it is. It's those things where you're like, okay, this is the type of algorithm that she's feeding. Okay, he's watching a lot of people having terrible accidents. Well, I'd rather he be more compassionate, but there could be worse things. And so that's been sort of my go-to and how I sort of have that accountability with them. I said, I don't need to see your phones too often, but every maybe 3 months, can I have a look at what your algorithms are showing you? Yeah. And that holds them to the standard of how they want to behave on their phones and how we expect them to. It makes them mindful because they are going to know that mom's going to know the types of trails they're walking down. And so I don't surveil them regularly, but I do encourage accountability in those ways.
Well, and we're going to circle back to that because we're going to talk about parental surveillance and some healthy ways that we can monitor our kiddos' online activities versus maybe not healthy ways. And similarly, like the just sort of how we allow them to be in the world offline as well. So let's go there. Well, actually, before we do, I kind of just want to close the loop on the smartphone thing. So like, I think you've sort of touched on it already, but this constant connection, the ubiquitous nature of a cell phone. I mean, I have a very hard time nagging my kids about their being on the phone all the time when my husband and I mean, my husband's a realtor. Like, he's on the phone all the time. And I'm just not the do as I say, not as I do mom, right? So it's difficult. And I actually think as adults, we're probably not doing a great job either.
No.
Dealing with this new technology. But specifically for young people, how does constant screen exposure and this social media, we haven't really touched on social media, but sort of, like, how does this impact a young person's ability to be resilient? And I know that's probably like an hour in and of itself, but just sort of at the top line.
The way I think about it is like, imagine never being able to turn off. having to be on your game all the time. So like when I went home from high school, I'd be exhausted. It's performative. You're trying to be something. You're trying to learn how to be. You're getting your flirting skills down, whatever it is. Like, but then you get home and the phone would be like, you got to go through my mom to talk to me. You got to like, there was breathing room. Mm-hmm. And our kids just don't have any breathing room to actually develop unless we give them the breathing room. As parents, like if we help them create the boundaries to give them breathing rooms to say, okay, I can't talk to you after 10, so I won't be the one that can help you.
Which we used to do that.
We used to do that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't dare call your buddy after 10 because it would wake up their parents, and those types of things.
It'd be awkward.
Awkward. The word of the year. And so, I think those pieces, like whatever we can do as parents to give them those breathing room moments, like times of day, phone out of your room, don't let it interrupt your sleep, family docking station, modeling those types of things, because it just is so intense for them.
I love that. I think they won't like that.
No.
I love my family. I love my family. We literally have like battles at dinner time because I'm like, put your phones down.
Yeah.
My husband and my daughter. Like it's not just her, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard.
It is really hard. And I guess.
And there's resistance.
Yeah.
Which you talked about conflict. Yeah. No one likes conflict, especially after you've had a long day and all you want to do is like kill some fruit on your phone.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Totally.
That's my favorite game, the harvest swap. That's what I do is like kill fruit. But like
absolutely,
the last thing you want to do is have conflict. But what you're saying is that it's important.
It is important, and to like cultivate that, where it's like these spaces, like, and it's not saying there's no phones. We have to have them. We tried.
So figure it out.
But figure out what you can come to with together to talk about through these issues. Like it's actually important for us to connect here. It's actually really important for you to have some breathing room and pay attention to the skills you want to learn. And it's really important for you to be able to like develop concentration, or you're not going to be able to succeed. So to be able to like do deep work on your homework, or deep work on the poetry you want to write, or deep work on the guitar you want to learn to play, like you have to be able to pay attention to something, and I want that for you, and that's a gift I want to give you. So how can we help you create this? How can you, and some of us need that accountability in ourselves too. How can you help me? How can we as a like make our household a place where all of us get to do something else as well as. So
this is where I give the shout out to sports and extracurriculars. I don't know, right, wrong, or otherwise, but we've really my kids are athletic, so that's kind of where their interest lies. But both of them competitive in their sports, and the amount of time that they have committed to those sports requires that they have that break, and also really offline social connections with other people.
Exactly. And caring adults who are investing in them besides you, and who are like saying hopefully things that resonate with you, and so many things that they like that. So if they're not into sports, what else?
Totally.
Where else can you get them doing something, keeping them active, engaged with other people, with caring adults
that are not parents.
They're parents.
Yeah.
I often think about too, the other thing that we're seeing a lot of, this is from Emily Nagasaki's Burnout book, but one of the things, all day long we get micro bursts of stress hormone, cortisol bursting all day long. And it's the fight or flight hormone. And the only way to spend cortisol is through physical activity. So movement, whether it's laughing, running up and down the stairs, going for a walk, hugging someone, like it can be spent in all of those ways, but it must be spent or it stays in us.
Right.
And I think our students, even in social media, there's not a real threat. There's not a saber-toothed tiger chasing us, but there is a real important social threat to them. And they don't know that they're having those cortisol bursts all day long. And if they're not having these opportunities to like physically spend that, then it is going to have negative impact on them as well. So like this was like finishing the stress response, which we're not doing in our culture because we don't even perceive it sometimes as something stressful, because it's like, oh, so-and-so said this, or I saw this channel and it's mocking me, or I saw this picture of me and it's terrible. And, you know, there's all these things flying at them all the time, and they're not even perceiving it as a stress response or a stressful.
Or even just like, wow, look at all the, I don't know, skinny people. Like they're so much better looking than me, or, you know, whatever, their hair is so much shinier, whatever. Yeah, it's like, I'm less than. Yeah. I need to be better. I need to look better or do better or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that about not finishing the stress response. Yeah. I never thought about this before, but as you were speaking, fight or flight, both of those responses to trauma are action.
Yeah.
There's also freeze, but I've read that at the end of freeze, there's a shake.
That's right.
Right? So it's all dispelling the cortisol.
It moves blood into our muscles so that we can run or fight. And so if we don't run or fight, then that just stays, and it still decreases our like digestion. It still, you know, sometimes people get blurry vision because it moves away from our sort of central function into just our large muscles, so that we can fight or flee. And so it's an important piece to sort of think through like all of these micro things that happen to us in modern society, where we get in minor conflicts, or we see something that makes us uncomfortable, or our teacher does something, or a parent does something, and we are not physically active enough. And a lot of our youth are not nearly physically active enough. So it's an important piece too.
And that activation, I'm just going to double click on this quickly, because I think this is applicable not just for young people, but also for adults.
Absolutely.
But that activation, you know, like you're driving along and some, you know, ding dong cuts you off. And it's just like, there is actually like a physical response in the body that if you can start to pay attention, you can notice. Yeah. Your heart starts to get faster. Your like body temperature heats up. At least it does with me, you know? Yeah. And so then that's where you can sort of track that and be like, ooh, activated.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Really figuring out what stress feels like in your body and learning how to deal with it is a huge emotional regulation skill, and really trying to figure out, all of those pieces.
And then completing that cycle.
Yeah. David Yeager, he has a new book, which I think every parent should read, and anybody who's trying to employ young people right now. It's called 10 to 25. And it's about, well, just like young people and how to elicit the best from them. So he takes sort of parenting literature and coaching literature and academic literature and teacher stuff, and sort of compiles the best science around bringing the best out in young people, what they require from us. And chapter 7 is all about stress in young people. And anyways, it's really incredible. But one of the pieces that I found most fascinating was he talks about even our belief about stress changes our biological reaction to it. So if young people believe that a stressful, like getting ready for an exam or getting ready for the basketball tournament, if they believe that they have the chance for success and that they believe that stress is enhancing, their chances of succeeding way increase, whether it's an exam, whether it's whatever. And if they believe that, oh, this stress is overwhelming me, I'll never be able to succeed, that actually is also true. And it's like a, I don't know, battlefield type of thing where they actually, they're less likely to die and bleed out because of the way that there's less testosterone released, or there's less something. I can't remember exactly what it was about, but there was something really interesting in your belief about the stress and how it changed the reaction, or like which hormones were released in the body and how your physical manifestation looked. So yeah, that I would, any parent that is like looking at motivation for their kid, unbelievable.
Really? But, okay. Yeah. So we'll like, Carly's going to make a note, and we're going to link to all these very cool books in our notes. But just very, very interesting. Yeah. And also just a real indication of like, you know, we talk about mental well-being and mental health, but it's so vast. Like there's so much we don't know about the chemistry of the brain and how complex we are as human beings. Yeah. Right. Like these responses and all of the triggers that happen in the body as a result are. And I am fascinated by evolutionary biology. So like, where did that come from and why does it still exist? And in the modern day, you know, how do we manage that? Because, you know, the saber-toothed tiger, it's always the proverbial threat is the saber-toothed tiger isn't actually coming to get us these days. But our body still thinks it is.
We can't fight or flee our biology teacher. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's get into the other piece that was on our agenda to chat about today. It's very interesting to me, is a lot of people that are listening to this have kids or are parents or grandparents or no kids or whatever, or are just generally part of a society. The way that we parent our children has changed in the last few decades. And I think as parents, we all think we're just trying to do the best that we can for our kids. Yeah. But how, and this change that we're going to discuss, this almost like over surveillance in offline activity, because we'll talk, it's a little bit different online. This is also being translated in our communities as well when it comes to young people. So like, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? How has our parenting style in general changed, and how is this translating in community?
Yeah. So this is a big theme that Jonathan Haidt talks about in this Anxious Generation book, but certainly something I've thought about a lot in my parenting journey as well. And something that we see a lot is that young people are not allowed to do anything risky, like walk to school even, lots of them, or play outside by themselves, or do things that may have been more normal a generation, certainly 2 generations ago, where you were out hiking mountains by yourself, doing things by yourself. You were learning the full scope of what your body and mind could do. You were learning that you could fail well, fail hard, fall hard, and wasn't the end of the world. You could get up again. You could do all sorts of things, like at maybe a slightly higher risk, but much lower risk, lower stakes than we're letting kids do, you know. And we'll often talk, we've said, oh yeah, we put them in elite sports. Well, actually, they're more likely to get a concussion in most sports, and they're more likely to have a broken bone in most sports than they would be playing freely and experiencing free play, which we're like so highly monitoring and not letting them do anything high risk. And there is a lot of people making that link to how they're able to fail when they get to us at university, right? They've never fallen, they've never failed. People have sort of protected them from their own behaviors, from the consequences of, you know, you fell and you need to fix that. You broke that window because you threw that rock, and you need to figure out how to pay for so-and-so's window. Like these things, these problems that youth will get into, and we've made it so that they aren't able to fail. Like we are so hard on them in sort of this kind
of lost. You know, like think about that. I remember my parents used to just be like, go out, get out of the house. Yeah. And we would go, if we lived on an acreage, and we would just go, we call it the back 40. Yeah. For hours. Yeah. And like parents didn't know where we were. And I'm not the back in the day person, but I think about that with my kids. Like I would be a little bit nervous if they just took off at 8. Yeah. And I didn't see them for 4 hours and I didn't know where they were. Yeah. That's not a thing anymore.
No, it's a much harder thing to get parents to do. And certainly in that book, he talks about like, that's the cops get called if they see a kid out wandering. And certainly like, I think about sort of the Facebook community groups, right? Oh, there's kids there's teenagers at the school right now. What are they doing? You should know your kids are there. Yeah, they might be.
I don't want to out a certain Facebook group. A lot of people know the one that she's referencing, and very, very concerned parents.
Yeah.
Very...
And I mean, there is a way to support youth and create healthy communities for youth, which is what we really need to work towards. That's about, okay, I want to be the house with the noisy teenagers. And I might bug a few of my neighbors. Sorry, neighbors. But I want to be the house where they're creating weird jumps into my pool. And I want to be the house that knows that I have the best ice cream cones. And I want to be the house that knows they can wrestle in my basement or whatever. You know, I want to be that house that's creating healthy boundaries, that's good stuff, but that also allows them to make some mistakes that we work through together in a low stakes way. And that we talk through, like, okay, you're loud too late, you did this, you know, what do you need to do to make that right? You know, those are the skills they need to learn now. And we do a terrible job of, like, we just we write youth off. They're terrible kids, they did this, they knocked on my door, they did this, don't ever let your kids out again. Instead of going, hey, kids, you want to come in? You want to do something? Like, here's a basketball. Like, we just write them off and chase them away and chase them to the margins of everything and chase them back to the basements to go back on their phones, instead of helping to create spaces where youth can flourish. And I think that's...
Be noisy, messy, loud.
With
break
us, break stuff. Let's fix it together.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how to pay that person back whose thing you broke. Let's really think through, like, everything you can learn by making those mistakes in low stakes way and with high support from parents. So it's not protecting them from the incident. It's helping them navigate through it.
So I have, and so this, over surveillance. I mean, I think that, again, it's rooted in, we want to keep our kids safe. I feel like the world isn't as safe as it was when I grew up, you know, and that maybe is my thing and my anxiety, but it is the world that they live in. Yeah. Right.
And actually, perception of risk and actual risk are two different things. Like, if you look at a lot of stats, it's much safer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's so funny. I was driving to work the other day, and I have to drive through a number of school zones because I live in an area where we have a lot of school zones.
Yeah.
And I drove past a couple of kids, siblings, I assumed. I also like to make up stories about people when I drive by them because it helps me pass the time. But they were little, like 5 and 7 maybe.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. They were walking to school, and the school was still a ways away.
Yeah.
And they were by themselves.
Yeah.
Which you don't see.
No.
And I was like, okay. No. Okay. Like, you don't see that.
Yeah.
But that's healthy.
Well, and there's, like, where is that line? You know, like, I don't know exactly. It'd be distance and it'd be all those things, but certainly figuring out moderated risk for your kids to take and creating pathways for, you know, people to experience challenge and risk and climbing and different levels of risk as they grow in safe ways is really important, right? And just helping to figure, I remember I was telling you in the pre-interview too, my daughter tobogganing at a school, and she got a bloody nose. And I specifically went to the office and I was like, I don't care. I'm really glad her nose is bleeding and that she's out playing in the snow and not sitting inside all day. I'm like, please don't ever use this little incident to say that there's no tobogganing or something stupid, because, like, kids need this. Like, she's having the best time. This is the highlight of her week. And so those ways that we can, like, okay, maybe you need a helmet, you know, like whatever. But, like, there's different ways we can, like, give
or them, like, a warning sign. Tobogganing can be dangerous.
No, I don't know.
Toboggan at your own risk?
Get out from the bottom of the hill. Other kids.
Move out of the way
It doesn't run
quickly.
into your legs anymore. Yeah. No, or maybe it's, but really those types of things are so important for them to learn their physical, like how strong they are, how easy it is to like bounce back, like it doesn't matter if you fail. It matters if you bounce. That's the thing,
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, how can we make them more bouncy?
Yeah.
Well, and I think about also circling back to what you're saying about conflict resolution as well.
Yeah. That's where they're learning those skills.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you're not learning that like if you're sort of mom guilty is marching into the principal's office and being like like
and even over monitoring the toboggan hill, like people are going to budge. How are you going to negotiate that? How are you going to deal with that? Those are really important skills.
Great, really great. And I know it's a huge topic, but I guess the point is that the over surveillance is really detrimental to them learning really important lessons about resiliency and autonomy and independence. And like I have two children. One absolutely refused to be over surveilled, right? Just extremely independent, boundary pusher, like all of the things. And then I have my second who is happy to let me drive. Yeah. Like, and I am like, oh, good, she needs me, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But I'm not probably helping her learn what she needs to learn to be a functioning adult in our society.
And every person is different, and so those pieces are knowing your kid and knowing what they need. And I remember I think that my kids are very different too, and thinking like this one needed me to push them physically, and this one needed to push them socially, and like that you like that deep knowledge of who they are so you can guide them into what challenge they do need to take.
That's the kind of attention that we can pay our kids.
Yes. Yeah. That deep knowledge of like, what's the skills they need to develop. Yeah.
And I just want to say, parenting is hard.
It's so hard. Yeah.
And it's even harder now. Yeah. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows I have a lot of compassion and empathy for parenting, and that I know many of us are just really trying to do the best we can while managing our own stuff. Yeah. So we've talked about sort of healthy ways that we can support our children offline. The tension that we have with this particular generation is that there's maybe over surveillance offline, which we need to pull back on, and no surveillance or very little or the wrong kind of surveillance online. Like, I've got a tracker on my kids. Yeah. So I can feel comfortable knowing that I know where they are at all times. I don't know if they love that. Yeah. But as far as activities, like you've already outlined, okay, so we need to be more involved. What are some, you talked about just going through your kids' algorithm. That I think that's a great healthy way that parents can be involved, but not overbearing in their kids' activities online. Are there some other recommendations that you have just with regards to becoming more engaged in your kids' online activities without being that mom or dad?
Yeah, it's tricky. And I would say it's very hard to go backwards. So as soon as you initiate, like letting them have phones and push that as far as you can, there's lots of countries starting to like make that laws around that.
Like they can't have
that no social media in Australia now till 16. There's countries doing a lot of work on this. So because of some of these trends we're seeing, and because of some of these,
but it's like we have that too, and they just lie.
Yeah,
like true. You have to be 18 to be on Instagram or something.
Yeah,
like
they'll get
that.
around a lot of it for sure, and they're already making away. But I do think it's like that. It is very hard to backtrack. Right. So as you engage, set it up and model it. I know it's hard, but like really trying to think through that sort of like, this is a a family policy. It's not about you being young. It's like, these are some things that we think are healthy for all of us. So what can we do? And really, like, what are those things that together you can all agree to? And it's sort of like a collaborative solution to trying to set up your family, because kids sense it too. They feel ignored by parents who are on their phone too much, and they'll call us out. I remember I checked something on my phone at a restaurant and I caught it. And so, like, if that's whatever you create as your family culture, I think is what we all need to live up to, and to set, like, to actually lead your family in these ways is really important. And so, I mean, those are some of the things that have worked for us so far. And
like, what if you just like had like, you talked about your son just deciding to get a flip phone, which is extreme. And you obviously cannot mandate that as a parent.
No.
But like, if y'all just decided to delete a particular social media app for a month. And like, do it together.
Challenge yourselves and see how it impacts you. I think in lots of, I think, you know, we did this really interesting, my kids have done that. They've gone off a certain app for a certain amount of time and notice how much time they gain back, or notice how much that was impacting them more than they thought. So we've and having like lots of conversations about those types of things, you know. My son decided, like, he didn't like Instagram, so he went off of it. And then when he went traveling last year, he's like, oh, actually I want it back. And so there's those types of things. But as long as you're like mindfully using things, because nothing's all or nothing. There's good and bad to everything and whatever. But it is sort of like, it's the how we use them and our relationship to them, just like everything. Like, it can be a really great, healthy relationship. One parent was talking to me about, like, it's not like kids call and say, come to the movies. So if you're not in the TikTok, or not TikTok,
in the
Snap conversation, group, you weren't invited to the movie. And it's not like anyone tried to exclude you. It's just that you weren't in the Snap, and we don't call. And so there's that tension too, where like, we can cause increasing isolation for our kids if we're too strict about it. But we do need to figure out that tension where we're really helping them be paying attention to how they're using it and what purpose it serves, and like helping them mock some of the like weird stuff and influencers that are just selling them things, and helping them develop deep media literacy around what's like, you know, like, make fun of stuff with them, like, say that's bananas, like that's not a true thing. Do you know that,
like,
right?
The ADHD things, right? Like, some of them are just like, that's like normal stuff.
That's normal stuff. And
like,
no, that's
I forget
not
my keys all the time, and I'm not ADHD. I
Yeah.
lose stuff, like, you know, that happens.
But you'll watch it and go, oh yeah, that all happened to
totally
me yesterday.
me.
Yeah. And so really helping them develop deep like literacy around like wellness trends and like all the people selling things that are not true. And anyways.
I almost made a declaration on this podcast about deleting social media.
Oh, wow.
For a bit. I think I might. Just to try and see what it's like.
Yeah.
So I'm being given the wink and the nod.
Okay, we're getting to the end.
Almost at time.
Okay.
And I have just really appreciated your insights on so much of this. And I know we've sort of wandered around. But I want to come back to a really important question. And I think you've touched on it a little bit. Why do you think it's important that we collectively need to protect our young people? And like, what are the conditions that create healthy and strong and resilient youth?
I love this. I think we're bad at community.
Yeah.
And what can we do to create healthier communities around all of the kids? I remember thinking one time when I was at Foundry, and this kid was like, I don't have anywhere I can sleep tonight. And I was like, gosh, how many hands would my kid have to fall through to end up with nowhere to sleep? Like, because I'd really thought about I want my kid to have as many caring adults around them for when I screw up, because I will, and I need people around them. So that was like a conscious objective I had, would be like, how many caring adults are surrounding my kid, and how am I helping them form meaningful relationships, and like friends whose parents I know and trust, that I trust their influence on my kids' lives, and all of those types of things. For me, that's the priority. And so for all of us to be really thinking through, how can we be part of creating healthy communities for youth? There was a quote, I think it's Malcolm X, but I'm not sure, so maybe double check before we publish this, but it was like, when I becomes we, even illness becomes wellness. And I think for our young people, that's even more important. And so right now, for this certain time in history, because we are so isolated, we're so independent, and we actually don't function that way. Humans weren't built for isolation. And so what can we do to help them cross paths with more intergenerational, more opportunities for wisdom and mentorship and challenge and accountability, and sort of some of those strength things, and modeling different levels of resilience, and how people cope with things in healthy ways, and how people learn to laugh on really hard days, and how people learn to be stronger, like those are the things that I would love to see us do in Kelowna. So I think that those are the types of things we need to, real life opportunities,
real life
connection. Yeah,
real life. I am going to switch gears a little bit. Okay. What gives you hope, Melissa?
Oh, what gives me hope? I think that this is a really important question for our young people too, because that was something I thought about a lot in my years of, we've sort of removed a lot of the infrastructure for hope that we used to give young people in all sorts of domains of life, whether it's spiritual or religious, or future and your career and your economy. And we've removed a lot of those pieces. But I do think the things that are giving me hope are, my kids have some incredible friends that are flourishing, that are making great decisions and doing cool stuff and having great adventure. I'm part of some incredible communities that are investing in each other and deeply trying to create change and community care. I think that there is really beautiful stuff happening all over the place. So I think those are the pockets of hope that I see.
And a lot of it is like what you choose to see, right? Yeah. You mentioned that you started as a nurse.
Yeah.
And now you're here.
Yeah.
How, if anything, how has your definition of health changed over the years?
I think it's gotten much broader and bigger.
Yeah.
Because and like maybe even the word well-being, where it's like political choices and policies and community and built environments and all of those things, where it used to just be quite a bit smaller, and whether or not I was sick or not, or healthy or not, or whatever.
Nothing's broken and I'm not sniffling, so
yeah,
it must be healthy.
It must be healthy. And now really looking at my neighbor, are they healthy? Are they flourishing? Is this good for everybody, or is it only good for a few people? So really like I see my health tied up a lot more with my neighbor more now than I used to.
I love that. I feel like you've kind of answered this question already, but we've talked about that the Wealthy podcast is kind of the, consolidation of all of the elements that fall into health, which is so broad. What areas of your life do you feel wealthy?
Oh, yeah, I feel rich in community. Yeah. I feel rich in, in lots of ways, I would say. Certainly I'm a middle-aged lady. And So there's
She said middle-aged lady. She whispered it just in case the mic didn't pick it up.
So yeah, you're certainly in that phase where you like feel weaker in some ways, but I also feel much stronger than I ever have in my life as well. So it's sort of a fun phase to think through all of the ways we continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Okay, and lastly, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know? Maybe a message that you'd like to leave them with?
Oh gosh, that seems like a lot of pressure.
Or not. A quote, a wish for the, future. What do you hope to see for the future of mental health care in our community? Youth mental health care.
Youth mental health care. We're going to be moving into a really cool phase with Thrive Okanagan, where we're going to be pulling on all those interviews I did and all of these really cool research projects that have happened in our community, and trying to think through what are some very specific, concrete actions that everybody can be a part of in our community in creating a healthier environment for young people. Because I do think that's one of the things, we keep trying to think how we can throw enough resources at the problem to fix it. And actually we need to move way back, because problems are so much harder to fix than prevention, And so I think for me, even when we talked about it's so hard to break your kid's phone dependence later on, but it's much easier to set them up with healthy policies and thinking early on as we start to expose them to it. And same thing with sort of all domains of creating a healthy community for youth. So when we're thinking through safety and belonging and opportunities for play and opportunities for deep engagement in our community and solid mentorship, what can all of us do to be a part of that equation for our young people? Because it will take a lot of us. And what's cool is it's really good for us too, when we are mentoring or playing or feeling a sense of belonging. For sure. Good for all of us.
Yeah. So we're going to have you back.
Oh,
because we didn't even scratch the surface of that work with Thrive. I mean, we did. You sort of introed it, but I know it's in progress.
Yeah,
and
we're
so
early. Just
as a backgrounder for everyone who's listening, paying attention, Thrive is an initiative that the KGH Foundation basically initiated. It's a project initiated with funding raised in our We See You campaign, which is our mental health campaign that we ran right after the pandemic. And out of that effort, we raised a substantial amount of funding for basically system change, and which is why we've set up Thrive. So Thrive invests in projects like the one Melissa's working on to really take a look at the locality of some of these big issues that we're facing in healthcare and how we can do it better.
Yeah.
And so Melissa's doing super exciting work, which we talked a little bit about, and we're going to have her back to talk more about it on a part 2 in the future. So thank you, Melissa, for joining me and sharing your wisdom and your wealth with all of us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.